They're not first class. Send them down. The flight attendant's voice rang out, clear and without a hint of hesitation. The ticket was torn in half, falling to the floor like trash. The boy standing next to his mother froze, his hand gripping the edge of her shirt. They weren't causing trouble. They did nothing wrong. They were simply standing at their assigned seats 1A and 1B in first class. No one in the cabin spoke up. Some turned away. Some lowered their heads and pretended to be busy. But in one corner, someone pressed record. And somewhere else, a woman who had just been humiliated was holding on to a secret that could get this entire crew fired before the plane even left the ground. Because the real question wasn't, do they deserve to sit in first class? It was who actually runs this airline and what happens when you try to drag the CEO down to economy? I don't need anyone to know who I am. But today, they'll have to remember. In this seat, I built this entire airline to reserve a place for it. I said, move. These seats aren't for your kind. That voice didn't need to shout. It only needed to be clear, cold and just loud enough for the rest of the first-class cabin to hear. A soft snap echoed through first class, the boarding pass torn in half like scrap paper. It dropped to the floor, landing right by flight attendant Morgan Field's polished shoe. Jade Sinclair stayed where she was. Gray coat, rough fabric pants, a charcoal cap pulled over part of her curly hair. No makeup, no designer watch. Just a black woman with her young son, the boy gripping a stuffed dinosaur. His eyes lost as he looked around. Seats 1A and 1B, booked 2 months ago now, seemed to have never existed. Their names vanished from the seat display. The system had updated. No explanation. No reason, just contemptuous stares and the familiar phrase, "Please cooperate so we can have a smooth boarding process." Captain Glenn Foster stepped out from behind the curtain. No questions, no checking IDs, not even a glance, just a routine nod. If they won't move, remove them. Jay didn't move. Noah gripped his mother's hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, what did we do wrong?" The air was thick like the dust clinging to the floor of the aircraft. She still didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't beg. She quietly took out her phone, turned on the screen not to film, just to start recording. Her face showed no emotion, but her gaze bore into every face around her. Staff, crew, passengers, everyone saw. No one intervened. But then someone had seen enough. Elena Ruiz, the trainee flight attendant, hands shaking. She stood near the galley, hearing Morgan's mocking laugh as she turned away. "I swear, she thinks a cheap sweater makes her VIP." Tanner, the second attendant, whispered just loud enough. Probably borrowed the kid for sympathy. Neither of them knew Elena was recording at all. And they had no idea Jade wasn't just any passenger. Not just a mother. Not just a black woman. She was the last thing they expected in this cabin. The holder of 28% of Orion Skyway's shares. The CEO, appointed 4 months ago quietly. She chose to fly without revealing her identity. She chose to observe, not to announce. But this time, they forced her hand. Not for her own dignity, but for the child asking, "Mom, can we still go to Vancouver?" She didn't answer. Just leaned down, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "Much farther than that, son." On that flight, it took just 10 minutes to have someone kicked out of their seat, and just 2 taps on a screen to have the entire crew replaced before the doors even closed. Because the real question isn't who's sitting in the wrong seat. It's who actually has the power to decide whether this plane takes off. Jade Sinclair didn't grow up with privilege. No one brought her into the corporate world with cocktail parties or handshakes after meetings. The first time she ever saw a cockpit was when her mother, a janitor at Oakland Airport, sat her down next to the cargo hold, her feet dangling, chest vibrating with the rumble of engines. Jade was only 8 then, but she remembered the yellow lights shining off the plane's body, the smell of fuel mixed with biting cold metal, and the crackling voices on the ground crew's radios. She didn't understand a thing, but she knew this was the world she wanted to enter. 15 years later, she applied to a budget airline not to fly, but to learn. HR rejected her at the interview stage. No experience, not the right demeanor. "We're looking for someone who fits the customer-facing image," they said gently. But the look in their eyes delivered a much clearer message. She'd seen that look since high school, in the library, on late-night grocery runs. But this time, it didn't hurt her. It woke her up. Jade started studying at night. By day, she worked the front desk at a logistics company. At night, she studied in her tiny rented room, window facing a cracked concrete wall. But she studied like there was no tomorrow: finance, operations, aviation law, airport infrastructure engineering. 10 years, then 15. Step by step, she bought shares in a startup specializing in aviation supply chain optimization, and from there, entered the airline industry not through the front door, but the back. She didn't need business cards. No one knew her face at conferences, but the numbers knew: profit, routes, retention rate. She worked in silence, but her results thundered like an engine at takeoff. When Orion Skyways hit a shareholder crisis, she said nothing, just bought up stakes. 5%, then 11%, then 28%. 4 months ago, when the board appointed an interim CEO, there was only one vote against, and it was from someone who didn't even show up. She didn't tell the press. Didn't change her seat on the plane. She still lined up like everyone else. Still traveled with her son. Still booked tickets under her ordinary name. Because she believed in observing the world without scaring it. She wanted to see how people treated each other when they didn't know who was watching. Noah, her son, didn't know who his mother was on paper. He only knew she once told him that, growing up, she wasn't allowed to touch the cockpit. Only to look from afar, she'd say, when the two of them stood at the boarding gate watching pilots walk by. Noah once asked, "Mom, did you ever want to fly a plane?" She shook her head. "I want to run the whole sky." He giggled at that. Today, standing in first class, being kicked out of the seats they'd reserved, Noah wasn't laughing. But Jade wasn't worried for him. She knew he was smart enough to remember and strong enough to understand. She once told a trusted colleague, "Real power doesn't need to be recognized by a title. It's about whether you can change the outcome even if no one notices you did it." Today, she brought no title onto this flight. Just a mother, but a mother who never forgot who she was. Her hand still held her phone. In her ear, Assistant Rachel reported that the internal recordings had begun to upload. Jade didn't need any grand gesture. She just needed to wait for the right moment. Not to reclaim a seat, but to teach everyone here a lesson sometimes. The person you try to push down is the very one keeping you in the air. The first-class cabin of Orion Skyways was nearly silent. Everyone was almost settled. The scent of fresh perfume and the faint sound of rolling suitcases still lingered in the air. Beige leather seats, soft lighting. A world completely separated from the thin curtain hiding the economy section behind. But that premium atmosphere quickly turned suffocating as Morgan Fields, the lead flight attendant, walked over to seats 1A, 1B, her face stiff, but her smile utterly fake. "Sorry, you're in the wrong seat." Not a question. A command. Jade looked up, her voice still as gentle as when asking for directions. "There must be a mistake. These are my seats and my son's. Booked last month." She held out her phone with the booking code and diamond membership card. Morgan didn't even glance. "These seats have been reassigned to a VIP passenger," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Please move to economy." Tanner Reed, the second attendant, stood behind. Arms folded, eyes fixed on Jade, mouth curling into a sly smile. He added, "You don't really look like a first-class passenger." His voice was soft, but every word dripped with disdain. Some heard it. Some pretended not to. No. Jade didn't react. She just took a deep breath, like she'd done 100 times in boardrooms when interrupted, or when mistaken for her own assistant. But Noah, her son, began to shrink into himself. The boy looked at his mother, then at the two attendants. His eyes lost. Jade scrolled through the app to pull up her digital boarding pass. She leaned toward Morgan. "I'm still listed in the 1A and 1B. She angled the screen for her to see. Morgan barely blinked. "The manifest here says different. We're going by our internal system." Tanner stepped in closer, watching the screen, then muttered, "Could be a glitch." But the tone was sarcastic, not helpful. Jade turned the screen slightly toward him. He backed off, smirking. Then Morgan reached out her hand, Not for the phone, but for the boarding pass. Jade hesitated, then handed it over. Morgan didn't scan it. She just held it, stared at it like it was counterfeit, and then ripped it clean down the middle. Dropped it onto the service tray without a word. "I confirmed before the flight," Jade said. Her voice low, not trembling, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "Membership card. Booking confirmation. Assigned seats." She spoke like she was taking minutes. But Morgan crossed her arms. "The system's been updated. Your name's no longer on the manifest or nurse." Then she signaled to Tanner, and both turned back toward the galley as if their job was done. A silence spread through the cabin, not loud, but crawling. Riley Brooks turned around. "I think they were here first." She was ignored. James Monroe, sitting next to her, spoke up too. "They're still holding their boarding passes. No one checked anything." Morgan shot back, "Please let us do our job." Captain Glenn Foster appeared, pushing the curtain aside with calculated calm. He looked directly at Jade, then at Noah. "If you don't move, we'll have to ask you to leave the plane." None of them used the words black. No one said discrimination, but every action spoke for itself. Jade turned to her son. "It's okay. I'm here." But inside, every nerve was stretched tight as a drum. Not from fear, but from familiarity. This wasn't the first time she'd watched a system rewrite her existence in real time. Noah clutched her sleeve, whispering, "Mom, did we do something wrong?" Elena Ruiz, the trainee, stood at the end of the cabin, her hands trembling, lips pressed tight. She'd seen something similar in Seattle 3 months ago. Back then, she stayed silent. Today, her chest felt tight, each breath pressing against her throat. She looked at Jade, not just a mother in a gray coat, but someone who hadn't blinked since this started. But this time, Jade wasn't just a passenger. And those who thought they controlled this cabin were about to learn that in a way they'd never forget. No one shouted. No one raised their voice. But the air inside the cabin felt louder than ever. It wasn't silence, it was something else. Something heavier, like breath held too long, or an instinct warning that something was deeply wrong. In seat 1A, Jade didn't move. Her hand rested calmly on her lap, but her eyes scanned like a heat sensor. One blinked too long, one turned shoulder, one smirk disguised as procedure. Noah leaned into her side, not speaking this time. He didn't ask the question again. He already knew the answer. Instead, he buried his face into the arm of her coat, holding his dinosaur like a life vest. Jade shifted slightly and adjusted the collar of his jacket. Quiet. Steady. Just to release her pony. But underneath, a calculus was unfolding. Every breath of delay was buying her control. Across the aisle, Riley Brooks looked around and quietly unlocked her phone. She didn't start filming, just opened her notes app and began typing every detail she could remember. Lead attendant refused to check ticket. Used phrase, "not your seat." Diamond card ignored. Child present. She kept writing. It was her way of remembering in case no one else did. Morgan Fields leaned near the galley, glass of water in hand, murmuring to Tanner. Their faces looked relaxed, almost smug. Tanner glanced at Jade and smirked, too confident for someone who'd just rewritten an assignment manifest. Elena Ruiz watched them from a few feet away, every muscle in her shoulders drawn tight. Inside her chest, or the words were still bouncing around like trapped air, "cheap sweater, borrowed the kid." She wasn't sure what Jade was going to do, but somehow, she knew it wouldn't involve yelling. Elena took a half step forward, then stopped. Morgan caught her movement and raised an eyebrow. Elena backed off, flushed, then looked down at her shoes. She remembered Seattle. She remembered the woman in the wheelchair who had to switch seats 3 times because the crew said she was too slow to block the aisle. Elena said nothing that time, but that silence had cost her sleep for a week. Suddenly, now, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the captain stepped out again. Glenn Foster, with that familiar air of practiced authority. 10 seconds, he said, without emotion, or you'll be escorted off. This time, Jade turned not to the captain, not to the crew, but to a passenger. She looked directly at James Monroe in 1D and asked, "Would you give up your seat if someone tore your name off it?" James didn't speak, but he shook his head. Morgan's expression shifted. Tanner blinked. The rules weren't holding like they used to. Something was shifting. Small but real. Jade didn't pull out her phone. She didn't tap her earpiece. That had already been done. What she did now was lean toward Noah, whisper something only he could hear. He nodded. And then across the cabin, someone coughed. Not from a cold, but from discomfort, the kind that travels skin to skin, guilt to guilt. People began to shift in their seats. Not speaking, not standing, but they weren't pretending anymore. Elena reached into her pocket. This time, she didn't ask permission. She hit record, because silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was a choice. And today, she was choosing differently. Elena Ruiz had never forgotten the flight to Seattle, the one where an elderly Asian woman was quietly moved to the back row for being too slow to store her bag. That day, Elena had said nothing. She told herself it was policy, a mistake, when to bury him out in the wild, a miscommunication. But deep down, she knew better. And she remembered the look in the woman's eyes, not shock, not anger, just the quiet ache of recognition. Today, that memory returned in sharp detail. Morgan Fields had returned to the galley. Tanner was whispering something crude. Elena stood still, but her hand had already moved phone in pocket, recording. This time, she wasn't going to pretend. This time, she was going to document every second. She could feel the gravity of the moment shift. Jade Sinclair, still seated with Noah, hadn't moved. But it wasn't just stillness, it was strategic silence. The kind that always came right before something irreversible. In the corner of the cabin, a standby pilot stepped in, his uniform shirt untucked, his brow furrowed. "What's going on here?" he asked. Morgan stepped forward too quickly. "Everything's under control." Riley Brooks rose from her seat. "Really, because this woman had her ticket in hand, and I watched it get torn up." James Monroe joined in. "I saw the system update after they told her to move." The pilot pulled out his phone. "Then I'm reporting this to dispatch. Something's not right." Elena's phone buzzed with a soft alert backup recording enabled. She didn't blink. She saw Jade shift slightly, glance toward Noah, then lean down not to reassure but to prepare him. "Some people won't be on this flight much longer," Jade whispered. Noah didn't reply. He just tightened his grip on the dinosaur and leaned into her coat. He didn't need full explanations. He could feel the air changing. Then, the sound of the aircraft door again. Not a usual sound. A different kind of entrance. Black blazer. Crisp walk. No name tag. Just presence. Sophia, the cabin stilled. She walked like someone used to walking into chaos and sorting it out in 3 sentences or less. Morgan's fake composure broke slightly. One shoulder tensed. Tanner backed toward the crew row. Captain Glenn Foster appeared again, startled. "Cabin is under control," he said, too fast. Sophia didn't blink. She faced Jade directly. "Sinclair, confirm your status." Jade nodded once. "Recording is active. System breaches logged." Sophia turned without pause. "I'll need all crew override commands. Cabin manifest changes. Security footage log. 15 minutes. No shouting. No arguments." But in that moment, every power in the cabin reversed. Jade didn't move, but it was clear now she didn't have to. The weight had shifted. Elena looked at Morgan, and for the first time, Morgan looked back not with control, but with dread. This was the part no one expected, not just resistance, but receipts. And this flight, once ruled by silence and protocol, had just been rerouted by truth. Not today. Jade's voice wasn't loud, but it rang out like a glass shattering on stone. She stood up not slowly, not hesitating. Every movement was measured, as if she'd rehearsed this in her mind 100 times. No one stopped her. She walked right to the center of the first-class aisle, standing tall, facing Captain Glenn Foster directly. "You just gave orders to the wrong person," she said. "And you did it in front of 14 witnesses." Glenn opened his mouth, but she raised her hand, no shouting needed. "I'm the second largest shareholder of Orion Skyways. This cabin has been recorded, and every act of abuse you've committed will be in the internal report, the next board meeting, and if needed, court." Passengers shifted. Riley Brooks stood up. "She's telling the truth. I saw it all." She sat before anyone. James Monroe added, "I've got memos." Morgan changed the log. Elena Ruiz stepped out of crew position. Her voice was tight, but clear I recorded their mockery. The manifest was altered. She was laughed at right in front of her son. Morgan froze. Tanner took a small step back. Sweat now clung to their foreheads like confession. Sophia stood quietly, her eyes scanning faces like a judge in open court. "Continue your statement," she said softly. Jade turned to Morgan. "You tore up the boarding pass of a Diamond member. You erased records. You mocked me in front of my child. And you assumed no one would notice because I wasn't wearing a designer coat." She turned to Glenn. "You saw me as a problem, not a person. You didn't verify anything. You just gave an order to disappear me." Sophia glanced toward the wall where the flight system synced. In Jade's earpiece, Rachel confirmed log updates traced to Fields and Reed. 3 overrides. Verified. Sophia looked directly at Morgan. "Anything to say?" Morgan opened her mouth. Jade cut in first. "I don't need your apology. I need accountability. It starts here." Elena, facing Morgan, said this wasn't a mistake. "You've done it before. But today, I'm not looking away." Passengers clapped quietly, then louder, building like a truth finally spoken. Sophia leaned toward Jade. "New crew is ready at the gate. Do you want to lead the transition?" Jade nodded. "Do it publicly." She turned to Noah, knelt down and whispered, "They tried to take our seat. But they're the ones grounded now." Noah whispered, "Did you scare them?" Jade smiled. "I showed them what the truth looks like." Captain Glenn Foster's authority began to flicker. He looked toward Morgan, but her face had paled. Tanner Reed's folded arms dropped to his sides. All three now stood not as professionals, but as people exposed. Jade turned to the passengers. She picked up the torn boarding pass folded once. Now a symbol. This, she said, wasn't torn by error. It was torn by a system that assumes who belongs and who doesn't. She pointed to seat 1 and I. This seat was never about comfort. It was a test to see if you'd look away when power was abused. Sophia nodded toward Jade. "Sinclair, what happens next?" Jade walked forward. "No press, no spectacle, just internal logs, evidence, and a company I built with fairness in mind." Her gaze held Glenn's. "You brought yourself down. I'm just witnessing it." Riley wiped a tear. James muttered, "This is long overdue." Elena stood behind Jade, not just a crew member now, but something more. Jade leaned to her son. "They didn't think we belonged, but I built this airline for you." Noah looked around the silent cabin. "They're not saying anything now, Mom." Jade smiled softly. "Because truth speaks louder than power." The moment Sophia nodded, the balance in the cabin shifted, no longer held by uniforms or rank, but by clarity. Jade didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked slowly to the center of the aisle, between rows of stunned passengers and shaken crew. Sophia tapped her tablet. A chime sounded. The intercom came alive. "Crew transfer in progress. Please remain seated." The original crew froze. Glenn Foster stiffened. Morgan clutched the dark tablet to her chest. Tanner stood uselessly, arms dangling, eyes avoiding contact. No one moved to stop Jade now. She turned calmly toward Sophia. "Let's proceed." Sophia nodded. "Gate 3 team is entering. I've authorized full handover." The cabin door opened again, not rushed, not dramatic. Just an arc and sure. A new captain stepped in, Lisa Chen, calm and composed. Beside her, First Officer Greg Patel and Purser Sarah Kim. All three wore crisp expressions, not surprised, but prepared. Each walked to Jade not to speak, but to acknowledge. A subtle nod. A silent confirmation, "We know who you are. And we stand with you." Jade returned the nod, then turned not toward the old crew, but toward the passengers. She wasn't here to punish. She was here to reset the compass. "This flight," she said quietly, "should have taken off 30 minutes ago. And it will under new hands. Hands that don't second-guess who deserves to sit in which seat." A beat of silence. Then a clap. Then more. Riley Brooks stood, applauding softly. James Monroe followed. Even passengers in economy craned forward through the curtain. Not a cheer, but a ripple of respect. Jade walked to her seat, the same one torn from her minutes ago. She looked down. The boarding pass, creased but whole, had been placed carefully on the tray table. Someone had kept it safe. She picked it up and turned to Noah, who stood beside her. This was never about the seat, she said gently. It's about what they tried to take when they thought we couldn't speak back. Noah looked up. But you did. She smiled. And now, so did everyone else. She helped him into the seat. He placed his stuffed dinosaur beside him like it had its own boarding pass. Then he leaned into her arm. From the back of the cabin, Elena watched not with awe, but with resolution. She had done her part. And now, she saw what courage looked like in real time. Sophia turned to the old crew. You are officially relieved. Step aside. Tuniorito. Glenn hesitated, but Morgan was already walking toward the galley, her eyes hollow. Tanner followed, no smirk, no excuse. No cameras, no media, no us, something. Just accountability. As the new crew began final checks, Jade took a long breath. Then she turned to Sophia. Thank you for showing up. Sophia gave a rare smile. Thank you for making it necessary. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The engines hummed to life. From the aisle seat, Noah looked out the window. We're really flying now. Jade looked around at the crew, the passengers, and the woman who chose to stand when silence would have been easier. Yes, she whispered. This time we won. We are. Flight 390 of Orion Skyways lifted into the sky exactly 42 minutes behind schedule. But not a single passenger complained. Not one, one. The cabin was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of tension anymore. It was the stillness of something recalibrated. Jade sat back in seat 1A. Noah nestled beside her, already dozing off with his dinosaur tucked under his arm. Through the window, the clouds drifted past like gentle smoke. Below them, the world had changed. Sophia stood near the galley, speaking in low tones with the new captain and crew. Then she approached Jade, her voice softer than before. Internal compliance just confirmed it. The override trail is airtight. Every crew change is backed by evidence. Jade nodded, but her focus was elsewhere. What about long-term security? Sophia didn't hesitate. I've already scheduled a session with the board. We'll formalize the Open Sky Ethics Protocol, mandatory bias training, anonymous crew evaluations, and a full audit of passenger treatment data for the last 12 months. Jade leaned forward slightly. Make it transparent. Real-time publishable. No more closed reports. Sophia smiled. Understood. And we'll make it retroactive. Jade nodded slowly. Then she looked down at Noah, his face calm now, as if the air had finally settled around him. She reached for her tablet and opened a new file, Passenger Restoration Policy, Draft 01. Behind her, a passenger in row 3 leaned forward. He didn't say much, just offered a quiet, simple line, thank you, for not letting them win. Jade turned, smiled slightly, and said, I didn't win. We just stopped losing. The seatbelt sign chimed. The cabin descended gently, and somewhere between clouds and coastline, a new kind of flight plan was already being written. Not just for this airline, but for every passenger who'd ever been told without words that they didn't belong. This was no longer just a flight. It was a return to what dignity should have always looked like at 30,000 feet. There was no press conference, no viral video, no breaking news, just a quiet update on the Orion Skyways internal portal, crew reassignment, Flight 390. Because operational misconduct, no names, no faces, just a ripple in the system like a wire quietly rerouted under the surface. Jade never gave an interview. She didn't need to. But something about that flight lived on inside every passenger who was there, and strangely, even among those who only heard about it secondhand. People began whispering on other flights. Remember that one with the mother and the torn ticket? They didn't know her name, but they remembered how she stood, how she didn't shout. Weeks later, a junior flight attendant on a red-eye from Chicago paused when a couple was asked to switch seats due to overbooking. She hesitated, then asked for a second opinion. It didn't feel right, and it was the first time she ever questioned the system aloud. At a training session, Elena Ruiz now stood at the front, not as a trainee, but as a speaker. She played back a recording, not of the confrontation, but of her own whisper, I'm recording now. She told the new hires, sometimes all it takes is one person choosing not to look away. And somewhere, a school teacher paused mid-lesson after a student raised his hand and said, my mom says seats don't mean anything if you built the plane. The class laughed, but the teacher didn't, because she understood. As for Jade, she boarded another flight weeks later, this time on a different airline. She wore the same gray coat, same cap. But this time, the agent looked her in the eye, smiled gently, and said, "Mrs. Sinclair, seat 1A is ready for you. No fuss. No performance. Just recognition done right." She sat down, opened her tablet. Noah was already reading beside her, tracing the clouds with his finger through the window. He asked quietly, "Do they know who you are this time?" She smiled not at him, but at the clouds. They don't need to. They just need to remember how to treat someone like they might be. And with that, the cabin door closed. And somewhere in the sky, a new kind of altitude was being defined. Have you ever witnessed something quiet but wrong? Would you have stayed seated or stood up like Jade, like Elena? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to Unveiled Wealth for more stories that don't shout but change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that doesn't need to say a word.